Hi, today we will see Angular architecture. We will understand how does Angular bootstrap and how does browser loads the Angular application and what happens during this process. So to get started, I can show you this diagram here where what happens is in a browser, if you start an Angular application, you will have something like app root selector. So let me go to my index.html. So in Angular application, you have this index.html file, and this is where, let me remove the tag. This is where you have this kind of app selector in a body. And when you run the Angular application, you should see the output here, something like this. The question is, how does browser understand this app root? Because it is not a standard HTML component. For example, if I put h3 here with Angular, you can see I have this with Angular here text and app root. So browser is able to render both of them. One of them is standard HTML and this is non-standard. When I say non-standard, what does it mean? Let me create another index.html file. I have the same code as of index.html, but I will not run this mock index.html via ngserve. I will directly open it into a browser. So what I will do is I will just take this file from the browser from the file explorer, and I will put it here. So as you can see, this is coming from a file and not from the server. Here we have a server running. Here we are directly opening a file. And the output is without Angular. So there is a text called without Angular. Here is the h3 without Angular, and I have app root tag as well here. But nothing is loaded because it doesn't understand, the browser doesn't understand what app root means. Okay, and that's where Angular comes into picture. So when you have a browser running the Angular application, it loads the Angular library inside it, which helps to resolve these kind of selectors or the components which are not standard. So here what will happen is, let's say we have this kind of hierarchy here. We have a app component. In app component, I have one h2 tag and one app users child component. So there is another component called users component which has selector app users, and is HTML. I'm doing this kind of for loop here, and I'm listing the users, and these users are being displayed by another component called app user details. So in app user details HTML, I'm trying to print out the first name and last name, and this is the output we are looking at in the browser here. This is the first name, this is the last name, right? So what happens is, you can see here we have a browser, and in browser I have some standard h1 just as a explanation, and there is an app root. So when browser try to render h1, it knows what to do with h1 tag, but when it encounters the app root, it doesn't know how to resolve this one. That's when browser try to ask Angular in a very simple way, hey, what does it mean? Do you know this tag? And Angular has this kind of dependency injection and the overall framework with the decorators and injection trees. It knows the list of known components and how to resolve them. So AppRoot, it knows that AppRoot is configured here. Like when we start the application, we have this kind of app config, not app config, here is the main.ts file. in .me_ts file, we say application start with app component and it has a selector app root. So it knows, okay, this app root selector should resolve to app component and this app component class has this HTML. So Angular says yes. For this, you can refer to this component here. Now browser will start rendering the h3 tag. It knows h3, so it renders it. Then it again comes back to the app users. So now it's also not a standard HTML tag. So again browser will ask Angular, hey, do you know this one? So Angular will say yes. You can contact user component. So the user component template will be called here. I can directly point it to here, just to like this. And within users component, we have one more reference to a component called user details. So in our application, you can see there is a user details and it has its own div. So what will happen is this app, okay, not here. This app detail will say you need to render this one. So with this kind of resolution, at the end, browser should be able to render something like this. So let me take this on the top here. And little bit top again. Okay. So now browser understand, okay, H1 I know. H3 users is coming from this component called app here. Sorry, from the, yes, app component. Then the for loop for this user component is being rendered with this kind of small template of div, and we are having this kind of div. So at the end in browser, it will be able to render all these components HTML here by consulting this path. We can see in our code again, like app users, sorry, app component, we had a h2 tag and app user. So let me make it a little bit smaller here. And let me open the Angular application on the side. So let's go through this sequence here. In the browser HTML, you can see in the body tag, first we have the h3 with Angular. So that should come from index.html. So in index.html, we have this h3 tag and we got this h3 tag here. Then there is an app root. We have an app root here. However, notice some properties here. ng host, ng version. So these are added by Angular, which it uses to resolve it with a specific component and its template, and applying some styles, of course. If I expand this app root, because it's a parent component, you can see we will go to the app components HTML here, which is user2, sorry, h2 with users. So here is h2 with users. And we have the another component reference app users. So we have this tag here app users, but notice again there are some kind of runtime information added here for Angular, and it is nothing but another container. So if I go to users component HTML, I have a div. So here is my division with a class container which I applied, and here is the for loop. So in the for loop, what I'm doing, I'm rendering all the users I get from the API, and for each entry, I want to render the app user detail component. And in app user detail component, I have another division which just print the first name and last name. So what does it mean? If I go back to my for loop here, you will not see for loop in the HTML. So this is only for Angular and compiler. So it will not be rendered, but number of instances of the user will be replaced with this component. So here you can see we have app. So this is the parent component here. Then here is the app user detail, and within app user detail, we have the div for the first name and last name. So here is our first name Emily, last name Johnson. Then the second object, Michael William. So if I just scroll down, we can see here. These are the first two we are just looking at. And so on. So this is how Angular understand and render it. But how does it do that? For that, you can see in the HTML, it includes the main.js. And in the main.js, it has some information how to load application. So if you open the source tab and if you go to the main.js, let me make it a little bit bigger here. So in the main.js, you should see some kind of your code references. For example, get users. In my application, I'm using get users in my service. So this app service code is being replaced in this kind of JavaScript code. Okay. So there is a more to that. There will be another video explaining how it works. But on very high level, this is the Angular creator tree of the component. Thank you.